You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hello, and thanks for joining Revolution 250, where we look at events that took place 250 years ago this week. This is a short from the American Revolution podcast, just a bonus episode to remind you about these important anniversaries of the Revolutionary War. This week, we remember the play Blockade of Boston, which was interrupted on January 8th, 1776. Over the fall and winter of 1775-76, the British Army was besieged in Boston. The last major tussle took place back in Bunker Hill in July. After that, the two armies essentially settled into their lines and waited. There were occasional raids here and there, but by and large, there wasn't much going on. General Washington took over the Continental Army shortly after Bunker Hill, and General Howe took command of the British Army after London recalled General Gage after they received news about Bunker Hill. General Howe had instructions to evacuate Boston, but he didn't have enough ships to remove his army and all the Loyalist civilians in Boston who would have been in big trouble if he had left them behind. He even had a lot of trouble finding enough food and wood for his army to survive. But perhaps the biggest problem was boredom. Soldiers with nothing to do mostly got into trouble. This included both officers and enlisted men. Some officers went home to London for the winter. General Howe deployed his second-in-command, General Henry Clinton, to sail down to Charleston, where he would command an incoming fleet that was sailing in from Ireland, and they would attempt to take the colony of South Carolina. General Howe and General Clinton had arrived together with a third general, Johnny Burgoyne, on the same ship that came to Boston in May of 1775. In addition to being a general, Burgoyne fancied himself a playwright. He'd actually written and produced a play in London in 1774 called The Maid of the Oaks, which got mixed reviews. Shortly after Burgoyne arrived in Boston, he got permission to convert Faneuil Hall into a theater. Up until the time of the British occupation, Boston had outlawed live theater, believing it to be immoral. But Burgoyne wanted to entertain the troops and oversaw plays that were performed there twice a week. As part of this ongoing effort, Burgoyne wrote a new play himself entitled The Blockade of Boston, a satirical comedy making fun of the colonies and their leaders. No copy of the play exists any longer, but one account written by an audience member reported that George Washington was a character in the play. He was portrayed as an uncouth country bumpkin who dressed shabbily, had a comically oversized wig, and a long rusty sword. By the time the play had its premiere on January 8, 1776, Burgoyne had already departed for London. The play began with an audience mostly made up of British regulars who wanted to enjoy the show. It got off to a good start when, in the middle of an act, one of the characters, still in costume, ran onto the stage to announce that the rebels were attacking. The audience responded, believing the outburst was just part of the play. The actor, who was also a British officer, had to repeat the announcement and convince the audience that this was not, in fact, part of a play. They were really under attack. About the same time that the play had begun, Continental Major Thomas Knowlton led a raid against the British outpost at Charlestown. Soldiers in the audience had to scramble out of the hall and get to their posts. Play participants had to remove their costumes and wipe off makeup so that they could report for duty. The scene turned into one of utter chaos. By the time the British soldiers got to their posts, Knowlton's raiding party had completed its work and retreated back to the American lines. The Americans had burned several homes and taken 5 prisoners. The raid itself was relatively trivial, but it did ruin the premiere of Burgoyne's play. There would be at least 2 more performances of the play in Boston, and during these runnings it would be uninterrupted. A few months later, the British would evacuate Boston. Burgoyne would be transferred to Quebec, where he commanded an invasion of New York. He would surrender that army at Saratoga and would return to Boston one last time as a prisoner of war. I hope you've enjoyed this Revolution 250 moment. You can learn more about these events in episode 80 of the American Revolution podcast. I would urge you to subscribe for free on whatever podcast platform you like. Thanks again for listening to this Revolution 250 moment on the American Revolution podcast.